We have our last set of chapters due this Sunday, and we're powering through content so that we can get to the fun of balancing harmony for the final project. Questions before diving back into mechanics of trades? All right, crazy empty class today. What is going on? They probably heard me yesterday. It's like, all right, whatever he has, I don't want that. It's just bronchitis. It's not contagious, but it is very annoying.
I thought they were if you played your own the way you today.
Yeah.
The bubble around.
Right. It's the computer scientist bubble. You getting too close, you might pass out. What are you doing and why do you need? All right, last time we were talking about introducing trades. We talked about things like the limits of what can be traded. Talked about how we could prolong play through trades, prevent exploitation through trades. And there were lots of developer possibilities for what we could do with regards to trades. And we ended by talking about how you want to make sure that you avoid king making in that, so that the person who's losing the game doesn't get to decide who wins the game. And that can be very true in any competitive environment, be it video game or board game. There is the ability to reduce complexity through trades. So some additional restrictions on when trading is allowed. If we allow trades at literally any time, then we need to write rules about all of the possibilities for when trades could occur and what trading could do. So it may just be better to disallow trading or very much restrict when trades are possible. So giving you an example, in Monopoly, if we could trade a property during rolling and moving, who collects the rent when a traded property is landed on? Is it like a stack where I'm going to trade this to you so that you can collect the rent of the person who is about to land on it? Or not? That becomes another interesting interaction that may just be unnecessary complexity rather than something that we should allow for within the rule set. There's also the concept of limited information. If you don't have to, if what's being traded is not known by all parties or at all between the parties, that can be interesting. So something like the Monty Hall problem. Do we all remember the Monty Hall problem or have seen the Monty Hall problem before? That's the 3-door problem where behind one is a car and behind two are goats. Or alternates to the problem where there are different things behind those doors, but maybe show of hands, who's familiar with the Monty Hall problem? Who has an intuitive idea of why what you should do in the Monty Hall problem is the correct thing? Fewer people. Kind of, sort of. Maybe we'll go over it very briefly. So in the Monty Hall problem, we'll set it up where you have the ability to pick one of 3 doors. Run a game show. It's a very short game. You don't know if it really belongs on a show in that case, but there are doors A, B, and C. You can pick the prize behind one of those doors. Then the host will reveal what's behind one of the doors that you did not pick, revealing that there is nothing behind that door. Then you are given the opportunity to switch the door that you have picked with the remaining door that is not picked. So let's say you pick door A, the host reveals that behind door B, there is nothing, or there is a goat representing whatever the bad outcome is behind that door. You're given the opportunity to switch. Do you want to continue to have door A and win the prize behind door A, or do you want to switch to door C? So those of you who are familiar with the problem, what's the right thing? What should you do?
Switch.
You should switch. Why?
Because when you first picked, you had a 33% chance, but now when you're picking, you have a 50% chance.
There is no 50% chance. It is still 1/3 and 2/3. You should switch for that exact reason, but why?
Because effectively what you're doing is you're changing the odds of the problem effectively. Because what's most likely going to happen is you're going to choose an incorrect door, statistically speaking, and then the other incorrect door is going to get removed. from a problem because of how it's set up. Therefore, instead of it changing your odds from 1-3, it's effectively doubling your odds by switching.
So it would be 1 and 2 if the host revealed what was behind a random door, potentially revealing the prize. Since the host will never reveal the prize, it turns out that it's still exactly the same game. Regardless of what door you pick, there exists one door that you did not pick, at least one door, that has no prize behind it. That is what the host is going to reveal because the host knows where the prize is. To make this more intuitive, I expand the problem and make it a little bit larger. I guess, is there anyone who doesn't believe me that this is not a 50-50 chance at this point? Interesting. All right, we're gonna,
So you're looking at 3 doors and.
3 doors. They show you pick one door, the host reveals what's behind one of the other doors. So you know for sure what's behind one of those doors. And the question is, should you switch? Yes or no? So the way that I intuitively describe this to people is we're going to go from there being 3 doors to 1 billion doors. There are now 1 billion doors in front of you. You get to pick and keep the prize behind one of those doors. There are duds behind everyone except for one door. Behind one of those doors is a prize. You pick a door. The host is going to systematically go down the doors, revealing behind what is behind every single one of them, except for one. And you now have the choice of, do you switch your door with the door that the host missed, the one door that is left, or do you keep the door that you picked? And to me, that is a much more intuitive way of saying that there is no way that that's a 50-50 problem. It is very likely that the host knows exactly where the prize is and skipped over that. To simulate this problem, we can do something like, let's go to a random number generator. And we will pick between a minimum of add block, 1,000, million, billion. All right, we're going to generate where the prize is, but I'm not going to do it quite yet. I would just say, okay, somebody in here pick the number of the door that we are going to pick between 1 and a billion. Door 5. All right. The prize behind door 5 is ours. The host is going to go down the line, skipping over door 5, because it's the one that we picked, and door 453,191,321. Those are the 2 doors that are left. Every other door has been opened, revealing a dud. Is it a 50-50 problem? Is door 5 50% likely to have the prize? No, it's extremely unlikely that the door that you picked, of course the host is going to ignore that door. Of course the host is going to ignore the door that the prize is behind. So, the same game, it just has more doors. We were here. So that's the Monty Hall problem. But now we're offering that the host offered us a trade, but the trade involves unknown information. So trades can have withheld information or partial information or even no information embedded in the trade, and that can create for an interesting outcome within the game. Another example of that is the old TV show Deal or No Deal, where you don't know what is in your case of a prize, but you know the distribution of prizes, and based on the cases that you reveal, the banker makes an offer to you about a prize that you could take instead of what is in your case. You just never have the ability to switch out your case. The goal is to stop playing the game once you have revealed enough low value cases that the expected value is going to be as high as possible. An additional mechanic you can embed inside of trades is a trading fee. Is there a transaction fee of some kind? What do we think? What are the benefits of having a transaction fee inside of trades? When would you want to design a transaction fee inside of a game?
go to reduce inflation by adding sync.
Yeah, that's a great place to add a sink, absolutely. What else?
Prevent people trading items between both of their accounts.
Yeah, it could prevent things like abuse where you farm on one account and then trade to another account. If there is some kind of transaction fee for that, some amount of currency that goes away from that would mean that, yeah, that creates a broader thing that we can talk about in a second. Yeah.
maybe if the auction house has its own bank account to simulate like a real economy.
Yeah. So mutually beneficial trades exist when you have something that I want more than what I have, and I have something that you want more than I do. That creates an opportunity to trade. That trade is worthwhile to do if there is no transaction fee as frequently as possible. But as soon as you add a transaction fee, I have to want your item more than the value of my item plus the transaction fee. And you have to want my item more than the value of your item plus the transaction fee, if both parties are paying into the transaction fee. So that can squelch how frequently trades are done. You have to really want to make the trade to be willing to eat the associated transaction fee. So it's a way to keep there from being quite as many trades. The higher the transaction fee, the fewer trades are going to happen, especially those that are low value trades. And that can also prevent botting, because an account that is set up to analyze and be able to make small amounts of profit over large amounts of trades, if you have a large transaction fee for that, the bot will no longer see that that is worth doing. And so a smaller proportion of the trades that are happening are coming from botted accounts. So yeah, basically it makes trades overall less profitable. So you have to have more resource imbalance in order for there to be a mutually beneficial trade. And that's interesting to think about. It removes a lot of trivial trades, small trades that are minimally beneficial to either party. And it's kind of like with stock trading. If you are manually responsible for the stock trading, you're not going to make as many trades as if you could write an algorithm that's going to look at, if I can make this trade for something else and then trade back, and at the end result of that, I have 2 more cents. Then an algorithm is happy to make that trade, but you personally are not going to sit there and click a few buttons to make 2 cents. So it removes as much botting as possible. How you set up your fee structure, you can set it up as a flat fee, a percentage of the trade's value, or have some time cost associated with the trade, so that in order to do the trade, you have to go to a location where the trades happen. And then the time that you're spending moving to that location where the trades happen and then moving back from that, you have to decide that going there is worth the value that you get out of making that trade. You can also place limits to how many trades can be done to prevent trade spam, to prevent botting. Once you can only make so many trades, then it's worth making sure that you're profiting as much as possible out of the trade allotment that you do have. And of course, if you add these costs, the developer now has more control over how those resources flow between players than if you do not have such a fee. If you do, then the players are completely responsible for that resource flow. And sometimes those limits are good. You can have fun ways of just putting sinks in your games. It reminds me of the old money-making game in Kingdom of Loathing. Not that many people have played this, but it was a large part of my life when I was in high school and college. But there was a gambling game called the money-making game, where the entirety of the game was that player 1 would put some amount of currency into a gambling machine. Another player would match that amount. And then randomly, one of the 2 players would get 99.8% of the cumulative pot. That's it. It was the entire game. The expected value was negative, but man, did that sink a lot of currency. People were happy to play that game.
Oh, so one person gets 99.8 and then the other is 0.
Yes.
2% just goes into the.
Yeah.
Okay.
It sinks 0.2% of the pot every time. And you can either initiate or you can match someone else's bet. And then it just randomly decides who gets 99.8% of the pot. Super simple game, super simple money sink, players love it. We can talk about futures. So when you can exchange resources for a future favor or a future resource, something that is like investing, it can sink it for the moment and come back at a later point for that. So something in a game where I will give you iron right now if you would agree not to attack me for the next 5 turns. This is most useful in a board game setting, but if you allow for trades like this inside of your rules, it creates more of a political environment for your players, and it creates an interesting game theory outcome. I really want to teach a game theory course at some point because game theory is really fun and interesting about how can you politically navigate to get what you want out of people who can give you what you want. What can you offer to them? How do you play that so that you maximize your utility so that you get what you want? When you can add politics like this to a game, it adds a very interesting dynamic where players are consistently trying to reach agreements, determining whether to honor those agreements, because just because I give you iron and you tell me you're not going to attack me for the next 5 turns, is that a guarantee you're not going to attack me for the next 5 turns? Absolutely not. Your word is at stake. That said, if we play this game again and you do attack me within those 5 turns, am I as willing to make those trades in the future? So there's all sorts of future analysis the players have to do to determine how much of the future am I willing to sacrifice for present value. Those kinds of decisions are very interesting in social games or political games. Has anyone played something like that or have a story from a political negotiation in a game that they've played that was an interesting decision or an interesting outcome? Yeah.
When I was like in middle school, I played a lot of Minecraft factions, and you have a faction, and then you can have other factions that you're kind of like friends with. And
Yeah.
there's a guy, and he was getting raided, and I went to go check on it, and then he got on and thought I was the one raiding him, and he totally like hated me, and then he was way richer than me, so it sucked because he was giving me stuff. But
Yeah.
The first time I played a game called Twilight Imperium, it was just really interesting because like that game is all like pre-planning and trading and all that kind of stuff for like 8 hours, and it was hilarious to sit there and just try to figure out. And I ended up making a deal with like the university faction where they would give me technology and I was just gonna bully whoever they didn't want nearby. So it was really interesting because I got tech and I got pushed forward through the game a lot faster, but I had more. I was just strong arming other people as well.
Yeah. If you had 1 and 2.
I've played a game called Roots that's has a lot of asymmetric gameplay.
Very asymmetric.
And the character that I usually like playing doesn't do I don't normally directly attack people. I usually engage in trading between one player and another so that I can say, hey, I'll play with you for a little while and against this person, and then later on I can say, hey, this is no longer profitable. I'll help you for this one, trade with you, get you through the water and so on.
Yeah. Yeah. Root's a fun game.
Yeah, inherently not a game you think is very like political, but I remember when I played like games like Smash Bros. But with like more than 2 people, like especially like, even if it's like just 3, especially like when you have 2 players who have like similar skill level and then one player who's notably worse, it very much became a game of trying to like essentially make the king making happen. Where you're trying to get a worse player to help you.
It's one of my favorite ways to play Commander in Magic the Gathering, is to build a deck that is very political in nature, where you can do bad things to people, and then you can solicit bids from people with regards to what will you do for me if I don't target you with this? And you can start to get goodwill in a way that the game is not balanced around that, but you can create imbalance from your ability to manipulate the other people you're playing with to use that to your advantage. So you get way more than the balanced value out of that mechanic. To give you an idea of what that is, the commander for that is Athreos, who can, when a creature dies, target opponent loses 3 life, or can decide to pay 3 life, and if they don't, the creature goes back to your hand. So who you can target whichever player you want to make that decision. And so you can solicit bids for things like who is willing to give me something in exchange for, I promise to not target you with that. Fun things like that. Other ways you can work fruit futures into games, you can invest currency, so have some kind of banking service. Takes me back to KOL again, even though there was no bank in the game, there was a player who had a ton of resources who kept track of a bank, and you could donate in-game money to the banking service, and you would take that money, make investments and trades, and then give you back your money with interest, but you wouldn't have to do any work for it. And so a player became the banking service within the multiplayer game, just because they had enough resources to do that. And that was an interesting way to play the game that the developers had not intended for the game to be made, but a player carved out their own profitability from recognizing that they could do this. But as a designer, you can also put that into your game in a way that allows the players to decide, are they willing to sacrifice resources now in order to get those resources in the future? Of course, whenever you allow players to do this, players can break their agreements, and that leads to a very fun game theoretic problem. Is it worthwhile for a designer to force a player to go through with their agreements? That is an option that you have as a designer. You could say, the rules state that if you make an agreement, you must honor that agreement. Or it could not be. You could have rules that say you can make agreements, but you can break those agreements at any time. When would you want to do one or the other? Is there a game situation where you think it would be more beneficial to force players to go through with their agreements or allow them the freedom to decide and break their agreements?
I think it's personally more interesting to allow them to break the agreements because it adds an element of risk. Like, do I want to trust this person to do this? Do I think they will go through with it?
Yeah, but it might make players less willing on average to make agreements if they think that those agreements could be broken. So if the gameplay is about making the agreement, then it might be worth the game enforcing the agreement. But I completely agree with you. It's a more interesting decision if the players can break those agreements. So 1, 2, 3.
Rust is a really good example where you can literally do whatever you want and take the trade of people, but there's people who like literally don't play the game, they're toxic.
Yeah.
Twilight Imperium, you can give away things called promissory notes.
Yep.
So even though there is the extent of like, I will promise this thing for you in the future if you do this thing for me, you could try and strong arm somebody or ask them for a favor. There is also this feeling of you will give me something in ransom in return for this deal, where I forcibly force you to do the thing that I want you to do.
Mm-hmm.
And that can be a part of the deal. So you can have it as a game mechanic where it's something that's tradable.
Yeah.
I think in games it like generally works better. Like you can get more guaranteed things in like a shorter game versus a long game having more game here. Because in a long game you can get reads on people, but in shorter games you play it repetitively, you can start to kind of get like patterns with someone's gonna follow an agreement and there maybe it doesn't matter if they have to. But like if you're just playing game once, it's not as interesting really if you can't if trades become unviable because there's no way to trust someone. You won't have enough experience ever really.
Yeah.
Those long games generally better to have more choice.
Yeah. That's all very good points. I can tell people what I do if I don't really want to make an agreement, but I have to make an agreement with people and I don't want to be seen as someone who breaks an agreement. How I politically navigate that is I will calculate some number of turns for which I'm willing to make that agreement. If the answer is something like, I'm willing to do that for 2 turns, instead of saying I agree to do this for 2 turns, I say at the beginning of my turn, I'm going to roll a die. I'm going to let randomness choose whether I am allowed to break this agreement or not. And if it's just a coin flip, then the average number of turns until that happens is 2. But somehow other players don't associate the randomness with that of me actually breaking the agreement because I want to break the agreement. It's because, oh, randomness allowed me to do that. Well, that's just luck. And so I can get away with less of the future punishment of breaking an agreement by adding the expected amount of time that I want to adhere to that agreement into the agreement in the first place. And it creates an interesting negotiation for Are you willing to accept that instead of just agreeing to do this for 5 turns, if I flip a coin and every time if it comes up heads, then I can break this agreement for free? Like, sure, and I go from a 5-turn agreement to an average of a 2-turn agreement, which benefits me. Use your knowledge of math against people. So yeah, next thing to consider, when should the developer get involved? When should players have full control? So fielded game theory is full of ways that you can manipulate this, negotiate this, find ways to get what you want out of discussions, negotiations, planning for the future. There's all sorts of ways to do that within that field. I think everyone in the modern day should be familiar with that. Talked about gifting a little bit. From a designer's perspective, the value of gifting, because it is so infrequently used, I feel like is a way that, to me, this is underused. It's great as a tool for retention. It feels really good to receive something from someone else. And it feels good to give someone something. So if you can find a way as a designer to create that engagement in a way that isn't a loss for one player and a gain for the other, then you're creating a bunch of goodwill between your player base at no cost to you. So you can do things like appointment mechanics, like log in once a day, log in every once in a while to claim a gift. Gives people a reason to open the game, and if they are intent on playing the game, it will become a reason for them. When someone does open the game, they're more likely to stick around for a bit because they think, now that I'm playing the game, oh right, this is what I was doing in that game. Why don't I go do one instance of this, which leads to another instance of that, which leads to your game being played more. It leads to players not forgetting about your game and having a reason to come back. Yeah, once the game is open, you have access to anything in your tool belt to keep them playing the game for longer than just the opening the game to claim that daily reward or daily prize. And it's much harder to get people to start a session than it is to retain someone once a session is started. So what else? What else could we do to get people to play a game or to start a session when they otherwise wouldn't?
In-game events.
Events, yes, that's huge. So something like a limited event that allows someone to claim something that is not going to be available after a certain period of time. Yep, events are good, 1 and 2.
It's a little more abstract, but just like overall making, incentivizing like online multiplayer mechanics, because like then that can lead to like if their friends are playing, then they are pressured to play more.
Yeah, so competitive mechanics as well. Absolutely. Or even cooperative. If your players are currently playing, then you want to join them because they're making progress without you. Or yeah, I guess we're good. 1 and 2. Yeah.
Helldivers will, like the devs will oftentimes just give like cosmetic options to the player base for free. But it's almost always after something big happens, like either some other event in the game has happened or the community chooses to do something. So then they'll use it as a commemorative action for the actions of the players to make it feel like the players have more impact, and they can be flaunting their colors, being like, I was here back then.
Right.
In like a cool free way instead of like a pay to play.
It keeps them playing to get it, and then there's a reason to keep playing after you get it to boast about where you were.
Yeah.
1 and 2.
Games like Minecraft and Terraria have stayed so relevant because they'll just do like a massive content update like every year or 2 years. And so like an appointment mechanic that's like every day, and what happens when someone like is done with the game. So adding content after a while, you can bring back huge amounts of people that can play the game.
Yep. Content updates.
You could have a game where you have like a company, like, and you have employees in the game, right? And you could give your employees money or income in exchange for them providing. So it's like it gives you an incentive to give things to your employees, your in-game employees, and your in-game employees then in turn will you can tax them or something, and you can get an increased amount of experience.
Yeah. One thing we haven't discussed is just like gifting, you can kind of do the inverse of that. Maybe there's an in-game tax that you have to pay on a daily basis. And if you don't log in, then you're not making as much money to be able to pay that. So it becomes a pressure of, if I don't log in and make up that money, it's going to go away from the day's tax. You have to be careful with a snowball effect from that. If I haven't logged in, I went on vacation, haven't logged in quite a few days, now I just don't have enough. I don't feel the motivation to play it again. Maybe I should go find something else to play. But that can be a kind of pressure that keeps people coming back for fear of loss instead of gain. Fear of loss is a pretty powerful motivator.
Well, in a case like that, you could potentially add like a vacation mode that could be activated a certain amount of time, where if you say I'll be on for a week, so it will tax you for that.
Yep. Yeah, and that could be something that you earn through gameplay that keeps you coming back. I know I have a vacation coming up. I better save up enough so that I can avoid the tax while I'm on vacation. Bunch of psychological manipulation. We have a lot of fun with games. Game designers are some of the best and worst people.
At the same time, though, that feels less like playing a game for fun and more just like working.
Yeah. Life is a game. It's just not a very fun one sometimes. Social draws are incredibly effective. So the larger your social network in a game, the more likely you are to come back and play that. For the people that you've met, especially since you can't meet outside of the game, or you have to introduce yourself at a more personal level to meet outside of the game, that becomes the social outlet for the people that you've met in the game. In addition to retention, it can be very powerful for recruitment. So give players something for getting people to sign up. So you take your players that already exist and get new players out of your players. You can assume that cost of new player acquisition is something like $250 per player. It doesn't matter if they play the game one sitting or stick around for a long time. The average cost of just getting someone to play your game is about $250 per player. You want 10,000 people to play your game, that's an investment. That's more money than that adds up very quickly. That's a fairly cheap new car to get 10,000 people to play your game. So if you can find ways to do that that don't have that cost of acquisition, or where you can pay that cost in terms of in-game resources to players, that's something that the developer doesn't have to pay out of pocket. So yeah, you can trade off that cost by giving in-game resources in order to do that. Yeah.
Sorry, I just want to say something. Like, have you seen like the thing the game Super Hot did, where it's like there's like a whole like assimilation plot line where when you beat the game, they'll actually send you a link to their website, which is basically like a discount code for Super Hot, so that you can tell your friends that like Super Hot is the most innovative first-person shooter ever. So it's like you beat the game, here, get your friends in on it. Here's a discount code that you can pass them over.
Huh.
Tell them more about the most innovative shooter game ever created.
Interesting. That's an interesting way that I've never heard of that before, but that's cool.
I like the thought about the Witcher mechanic where like you can bring the equipment you have from the previous game into the next one too. Which can sometimes, like if someone just came in from the second one, lead you to want to play the first one so you can get some of that thing.
Yeah, and that could be extra revenue picking up the prequel, even if the sequel is a better game. Just the thought of I'm missing out on the prequel, and if I play 1 and then 2 rather than 2 and then 1, if I like 2, that gets people to play the first game first. Very underutilized mechanic in games are auctions. There are so many different ways that you can hold auctions that, to me, lead to very interesting decisions. And games just don't really rely on this quite as much as they should. So if you as a designer want to figure out which of your players are willing to pay the most for something, the auction is the easiest way to figure that out. However, does an auction maximize the seller's revenue? Potentially.
Only if people are willing to pay a lot of money for it. If the well, it could end up selling for a lot, it could also end up selling for very little.
Yeah,
But I guess the argument for that would be, maybe that's all they would be willing to pay anyways. That's all the value they could have gotten out of it.
there's something we're missing.
You're only getting really like the maximized revenue what you could have got in the time it's open, because depending on times, sometimes you get more, sometimes you get less. It's not the max you could get, but it's the max you get in that time.
It's actually not. That's a great idea. How is it not?
I was thinking more, it depends on the mechanics of the auction, because when you post it at a price, that's the price that you're like, I would be happy getting this price, and you can only
Yeah.
really go up from there.
All right, we're gonna play a very quick auction game. I need 2 volunteers. 1, 2. All right, I'm going to tell you that we have a maximum willingness to pay for this very cool mouse. You're willing to pay $3. You're willing to pay $10,000. You really want this mouse. And so I start the auction at $1. Who's willing to pay $1 for this?
Me.
Great, we have one person willing to pay $1. I go $2. All right, $2, $3. Getting there. All right, $4. $5. All right, it's going to be sold for $4. Did I maximize the money that I would have made from this? There was someone out there willing to pay $10,000 for that mouse, and it sold for $4. Why?
Because there wasn't enough competition in the auction.
Yeah, there was a big difference between what the highest willingness to pay was and the second highest willingness to pay. So the willingness to pay, the value this is going to sell at is slightly higher than the second highest person's willingness to pay. So it does not actually maximize the seller's revenue because it's not open like that. Yeah.
To be fair, but also partially relies on like with people like trying to buy it being smart.
Yeah, there's certainly a game being played.
Someone could be smart and slowly raise to, outbid other people. They also might just not be very smart, depending on how the auction system
That
works.
can be a bit of a risk. If you want to pay more than your willingness to pay, to try to get someone else to pay more for an advantage in a later auction after they've spent all of their money, if you can convince Nathan to pay $9,500 for this mouse, you won't be able to pay $1,000 for this car later on that's worth way more than that.
There's also I've seen like in some, I guess in my own example, if I ever comes to find like Hyperx Skywalk does have like essentially an auction system, and there's some value in like trying like if you do like close like if two people are like similar price ranges for willing to pay, if you do like because you can only see what they're betting, you can't necessarily see how much they're willing to pay.
Right.
If you're going up in small values, they might think you're closer to your limit. They might be more willing to go over a point versus doing like a large jump, maybe to like 100, might quickly weed out a lot of people.
Sure.
But you're risking losing more.
Right. Yeah, depending on the step size for that. Absolutely. So there may be some value in keeping the auctioned item away from other players. I see this in things like Magic the Gathering drafts. If I see a card that is okay for my deck and a windmill slam card that just does not fit in the deck that I'm constructing, but I don't want to give that to someone else, the value may be higher for me to remove that card from the pool so I don't have to play against it, rather than pick the card that is okay for my deck. If you're designing an auction, what do you consider when you're coming up with the rules for that auction? So questions that you might ask. Should the game emphasize the buyer's side, the seller's side, or both? So who is the seller of the item? Is that a player? How much quality of life do we want on the seller? Are we trying to maximize the seller's revenue from this item? Do we care about that from a design perspective? Yeah.
I think the seller's side probably should be valued more because if nobody's selling an auction house, it won't be used at all.
There's something to be said about we need sellers in order for there to be transactions.
But then at the same time, if nobody buys from the auction house, so.
Right. If you turn away half of your buyers, you still have a system.
Yeah.
If you turn away a seller, that item is no longer listed. So we could look at the seller side. How easy is it to make bids? How easy is it to get a good deal from an auction house from a buyer's perspective? You will have more prospective buyers if it seems like when you engage in this auction, it's likely that you're going to get a good deal. There are lots of scams out there with regards to sites that say you can win this PlayStation I got this for $20. And what you don't see is that there's a cost per bid associated with this. So by the time that you actually win something, you've spent more than the value of the item in the first place. So it can look like, depending on how you present it, like it's going to be a deal from the buyer's side. What about being able to haggle during the auction? That's an interesting way to create an auction. So something like, can you support bluffing? Can I say, I'm willing to spend this much money, and then after the item is sold, you retract your bid? It's an interesting idea. May have some potential problems, but it might get closer to the seller's willingness to bid. If now the $10,000 amount, we can get closer to $10,000, and at the end of that, someone can say, actually, my highest willingness to pay was $3. I just wanted to see how much Nathan's willing to buy this for.
I think that you should support bluffing, because you could just create an alt account and inflate your own bid, essentially.
Potentially, but then you'd be getting closer to your actual value. By doing that, you see what someone's willingness to pay actually is. So if we're trying to, from a designer's perspective, prioritize the sellers more than the buyers, and make sure that we're actually getting closer to the equilibrium value of the item, then you could do something like that. But yeah, absolutely, it could be a terrible idea if that's now the way. It's not worth making an auction unless you make an alt that's willing to do that within your own account. It makes way more work to sell an item than it should be.
You could do some sort of like intermediate version where you just accept a like a portion of the like a percentage
Yeah,
upfront.
yeah, you could do that where, yeah, when you make a bid, you actually have to put something on the table.
Like a deposit.
Yeah, for your bid. Maybe you don't get that deposit back, or you only get your deposit back if you win the item.
Or you have to like have your bank check before you start bidding, because then like you were saying, if you have an alt account, you just get up there trying to run your numbers up. It's like, if I'm a buyer, I don't want someone on an alt account running numbers up on me. I want the best price I can get. So
Yeah, lots to consider. What are the actual value of the items that people are bidding for? Do we want that to be full information? Do we want players to actually have a sense of what they're bidding for? Imagine I'm telling you that the true value of this car that is up for auction is $30,000. Does that change your willingness, or what your maximum that you're willing to buy into it is? Or if I just say, it's a car,
it gives you like a perceived like quality increase, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Because like if it's like a $1,000 beater versus a $30,000 car, you're like, oh, I can spend a little bit more on this and I will still, get a really good deal versus.
yes, that can also switch the emphasis from the seller to the buyer, or the buyer to the seller, depending on how much information is embedded in the auction. Another variable you might have control over: how frequently can players bid? That becomes now strategic. When do I decide to put money down? If you can only bid 3 times, how does that change your strategy for making sure that you win the item for the value that you want to win it at? Or if you can only bid every 30 seconds, but the auction will end 5 seconds after the last bid. If you make a bid, it might not come back around to you to where you can make another bid. And maybe that is a way that we can prioritize the buyer and make sure the buyer gets a good deal on the items that are for sale. What should the maximum bid value be, or an increment from the last bid? You can place ceilings on the cap, so as you get closer to it, then you're fighting other players if you actually value it at the maximum bid. You want to be the person who places that maximum bid when it is available to be bid on. So we can either prolong the auction or try to end the auction quickly, and that can help prioritize the seller. You don't want your item to be up for auction for a very long period of time. You would want to be able to sell the item quickly versus trying to make sure that you get every last dollar, every last piece of currency out of the value of each item. That's a trade-off as well. If you have time limits, that's time pressure on someone. If they think, I'm losing this, I'm at my willingness to spend, but if I don't make another bid, I'm going to lose this item, that might allow for someone to go past their willingness to spend because of that time pressure. There's also the concept of reserve pricing, where the seller can place a hidden reserve on the item, where if the bids don't get to the value of the item that they value it at, it doesn't sell, and it's returned to the buyer. That can either be public, we need to get to this point in order to sell the item, or hidden. There are buyouts, forego the auction process completely as long as a player is willing to pay what the seller wants to sell the item for. So it's either an auction to determine the maximum value, or just buy it now. Very the old eBay way. There are negative auctions where you can bid to avoid negative outcomes. How much are you willing to give up to prevent this bad thing from happening to you? So all sorts of mechanics you can utilize. We can talk about the different types of auctions because you can structure the auction in different ways. You can have an open auction, anyone can bid at any point in real time, as long as you're bidding something that is higher than what has already been bid. A circle auction, turn-based, players take turns, we just go around the circle. Would you like to best the prior bid? Would you like to best the prior bid? Would you like to beat the prior bid? Until everybody passes their turn, then the last person who bid wins the item. How many passes are people allowed? You could do something like once you pass, you're out. You can't come back in. Or you're allowed to pass and come back in once. Or that could create very interesting decisions of how quickly the auction ends. Whether there's a fixed price, the seller sets a price and waits for a willing buyer. This could also even be within the auction. If there is a hidden value at which I will sell the item, you're trying to get the item for the least possible value. But once we get to that value, the item immediately sells for that value. How does that change people's bidding strategy? This can also lead for sellers to overprice things and bring their prices down over time. That maximizes the value that the seller sells for, because as soon as it hits someone's willingness to buy, then the item sells. There are silent auctions. You've seen these before. Every bid is secret and simultaneous, meaning that someone writes down, you write down your willingness to pay, everyone writes down their willingness to pay, and we compare, and the item goes to the highest bidder. How do you resolve ties in a silent auction? That becomes a problem that you have to figure out. If two people, the highest willingness to pay is between two people. There's the Dutch auction. Starts with a high price and begins lowering in real time. And as soon as you buzz in, you buy the item for the current value that it's listed at. So lots of different types of auctions. Further ones, single item auction. Each item is bid on independently. So when you place a bid, you're placing a bid on a single item. There's a multiple item auction where you auction off items in groups or baskets, and the winner wins the entire basket. This is a way to get rid of lower value items without having to set up auctions for each of those lower value items. You're not going to get the full value out of each of those items, but maybe you take a bundle discount to get rid of things that you don't want to sell on an individual basis. There's a draft auction. You can bid for the right to choose a remaining item from a pool of items. So there are 10 items up on this table. We go through a bid process. Whoever wins that goes up and picks their favorite item out of the 10. And we repeat the process with 9 items on the table. Repeat the process with 8 items on the table. And that can be very interesting. If you are betting against someone else, not knowing the item they want to go get, you could be betting against them. They spend up to their willingness to pay, and they don't even go get the item you wanted. And then you can go win that for a lesser amount later on. Interesting possibility. How is payment done in auctions? Either the winner pays the amount they bid, no one else pays anything. You can set it up so everyone pays their bid, their maximum bid, regardless of who wins. That is a very fun way to hold an auction. Whenever you bid, you're willing to throw that much money away if you don't win. That creates some serious pressure. And in fact, this can ramp an item up way past what it's actually worth, because you come up with, it becomes more and more of a, if I don't win this item, I just threw all this money away. So you're willing to go a little bit higher to force the pressure on the other person, but then they're willing to go higher and higher and higher and higher till one of you is willing to throw away a ton of money because you just can't go any higher. Strange way of making an auction, but again, that creates a very interesting, especially game-based economy type of auction, when it isn't real money that's at stake. You could have some paying, something like the top 2 people pay. So if you're in a 3-way auction, you're okay going higher as long as the other 2 people will go higher. That bumps you off of your willingness to pay. But as soon as you're at the second position, then you're on the hook to pay. So you can customize these rules. Top 2, top 3, top half. Only those who have won a past auction have to pay. This is a way of spreading out the prizes among other people. Once you win an item, if you want to try to win a second item, you have to pay your bid, regardless of whether you win the item or not. Interesting way of doing that. The top bidder pays whatever the second highest amount was. That's an interesting way to do it as well. Each bidder pays the difference between their bid and the next lowest bid. That's interesting as well. So that's a way of splitting the cost of the auction value, but still only one person gets the prize at the end. So tons of customizing to how you could hold an auction. And again, I just feel like there is such a big design space here, and it's very underutilized in practice. So we're out of time for the day, but I think a fun exercise that we can start tomorrow's class with is I'll have you design an auction, a custom auction for some game-based outcome. And I want to see what people can come up with for some interesting auction designs. So I'll see what the start of tomorrow's class for that. Think about it between today and tomorrow.